Hey, this is Jouke. I'm the founder and host of the European Software as a Medical Device Meetup group. This is our first video, and that's pretty cool for me because I've been hosting this meetup for almost 2 years, and that's been a lot of fun to host. But we've gotten a lot of requests, like, can we see the videos afterwards, because new people joining or people that could not attend. And the answer has always been no. We would like to have like confidential private discussions as well sometimes, and people should be very free to say whatever they want. I think recording every part of the session would hinder that a bit, but I think we found a nice balance. So right now we have a couple of speakers. We take those parts where they just do their presentation, we post them online, and the rest is still however private we like it. So let me give you some background about this group, right? Because this is really exciting. We went from about 10 people to 300 right now in the span of 2 years, and we're still growing every event that we do. I'm pretty proud of that. But I started this group because getting certified as a medical device, a low-risk medical device in Europe a couple of years ago was very tough. There's a lot of things you don't know as a software developer. That's my background. And that's really difficult. This feedback cycle for software medical devices is a lot longer, of course, than the feedback cycle for software. In software, you just hit enter, compile, and bam, it's done. In software medical devices, you have to wait a year for your auditor to come in and check everything, and then you figure out if you did the right thing. So I wanted to build this group to prevent those kind of things, right? I wanted to make compliance much easier. I want to build a network of industry experts that are willing to help each other. We do that not only here on the meetup groups, but also on the Slack group of OpenRegulatory.com, a group of people with the same ideas. And I wanted to discuss best practice, problems, whatever people need. Sometimes also a shoulder to cry on maybe, but that's different. I wish that a couple of years ago I had the same access to these experts as we had now. That would have saved me a lot of gray hairs. But you can join both the OpenRegulatory group, their Slack group, but you can also join our meetup group. Just find us on European SaMD on meetup.com, and it's free. You can join every 2 months. It's on Wednesday evenings European time, and you can join. You can add something to discussion or just observe, whatever you like. So in the past, we discussed a couple of different topics. You can see them here. We did requirements management, risk management, stupid questions night. It was really fun. We did data security, significant change assessments under the MDR, how fast can we get the release cycle, software tools validation, and most recently post-market surveillance. We have 2 bits of presentations from the last meetup. We have 2 talks about post-market surveillance, one by Theunissen. He's a link compliance expert at GreyRA, and the second by Sven, Piechottka, the QMS and compliance and data privacy expert of OpenRegulatory. It might be a bit messy because this is our first recording. I don't have a lot of experience, video editing, those kind of things. It's a bit messy, but I think you'll live. So enjoy the video, and don't forget at the end to join the meetup group. Have fun.
Let's start with a bit my view on PMS, how I organize it. Maybe for the ones who don't know me, I'm a regulatory consultant, meaning that I support a number of clients with regulatory affairs. With some, I am simply the regulatory affairs manager. And so that's my main job. Half of them are, let's say, IVDs or active medical device, and the other half are software only. So that's basically what I do. And so looking at PMS, this is a circle that I sometimes put also in the PMS procedure just to describe a bit how it works. So obviously you need a plan. I personally like to combine PMS and PMCF. So PMS being, let's say, the overall process, and PMCF being the clinical, let's say, the update of the clinical evaluation. That's the result of this PMCF part. And then you go into this circle, and you can do it 2 times a year, 1 time a year. Basically, as long as you stick to the frequency in the MDR, so class 2A. Once each 2 years, you need this to make this report where you go all the way around through this circle. And for a class 2B and 3, you need to do it at least once a year. So what for me is important is that it's a bit like also one of the comments. It's not just reactive. So that's if you look at the 3 boxes on the right, it's not just the vigilance part where you basically wait for complaints and handle them in a correct manner. It's also that you do some active, maybe studies or other active activities to gather more data from the market. And it's a bit up to you how you do that. You can send out surveys, you can visit a couple of key customers, but everything. The main thing is it must bring you something. We don't do it just to satisfy a notified body. We really do this also to let's say improve our product. That must always be the main goal. So and after this cycle, you update typically your clinical evaluation. You summarize the activities you did in this PSUR, or if it's a class 1 in the PMS report, and then you basically start again. Personally, I have a preference to keep the plan as stable as possible. So one of the questions I ask in this PSUR report is the plan still applicable? If yes, then we simply do another year or another 2 years. So to have as less updates as possible. And then if you look at the middle part, that's obviously what it's about. I think the main thing that you do with all this data that comes out of your PMS and PMCF is to check if your risk analysis is still accurate. And in my experience, notified bodies really do expect that you update your risk analysis if you're in the first year on the market. In their view, and I've talked with a couple of them, the chance that you don't have an update of your risk analysis in 1 year time, that's almost impossible. Then you would have done all the estimates so well. Maybe because it was a really lengthy pre-market phase where you had a lot of studies, that could be a reason. But otherwise, I think it's reasonable to expect those updates of the risk analysis. And obviously, they can lead to other changes in your product, like design changes, or you update your training, or it could even be that you update your processes or production processes, or whatever is needed. So that's a bit the key thing. Jouke, do we questions along the way or at the end? Or
Up to you. So people can ask the questions in the Q&A part, interactively type them in.
Yeah, perfect.
I'll keep an eye out.
Yeah. So anything you hear you like to comment or you don't agree, then let me know. And it's not that much slides. So so a bit on my experience. So again, I already said it a bit in the discussion up front. I think it definitely brings more knowledge on how devices are used. I gave that example of a company that had, it wasn't an active device, but they had no clue how often it was used, and the disposal parts were simply thrown away, and they thought they were used. I also, sorry, it's a typo. It's a chance, obviously, to contact your customers. And I think the downside is more work. And that's, in my experience, mainly because notified bodies really like to look at the MDR as a sort of a checklist, and you have to address every single aspect in the MDR. There's obviously, I assume that most have read it. There's obviously the list of things they expect in a plan, and if you miss only one thing, then that's immediately a non-conformity, in my experience, and that's a bit of a pity. So I would definitely like to see a bit more like a pragmatic approach to this. But again, overall, my experience with the process in general is quite positive. So if you go through the MDR, and then if you look at PMS, there's this list of things that you should address. So how you look at that data. So I added that list in this slide with a couple of comments from my side. So again, feel free to interrupt or to disagree. So the first thing is an analysis of all serious incidents. So hopefully you don't have that much. That are the ones you need to report anyway. And so you could put them all on a big stack, and then if you had that much, and then do some analysis on it. I think in general this activity is empty in the report. The second is the non-serious incident analysis. So that's basically those complaints or other piece of information where you decide that it's an incident. So it means that somehow your device did not perform according to specifications or comparable situations, and you need to analyze them basically to check for trends. I have an additional slide on this, because we run into quite some problems with notified bodies in defining that. So I have a sort of a recipe, and I'd like to show you in the next slide. So the other aspect I think you always need to do is sort of literature database, registers. I try typically to cover that as part of PMCF, where you already look at vigilance of similar devices, at least, assuming you don't have any devices that are deemed equivalent. But it is, and I think already somebody else also mentioned that it is, I think, really nice to look a bit broader at other devices, also at their websites, maybe new claims they're making or new features they add to their products. Other feedback is a very, obviously, very broadly defined. But typically you could decide to go to exhibitions, to do customer surveys. Okay, the similar device is already discussed with the literature part.
I have a question about this. So you say try to cover it in PMCF. Why can't we just not move it to PMCF?
Yeah, it is. The MDR defines it as a PMS plan item that you need to address. And I didn't.
2 minutes.
Sorry?
2 minutes.
2 minutes left.
Okay, yeah. So PMCF is, so I'll skip the question. Yeah, I think the 2 minutes is without the question round. So yeah. So I think it's okay. Yeah, so I'll finish this slide and the next one, and then we can do the questions. That's okay. So
sure.
I'll come back to that one, Jouke. So PMCF, obviously you need to repeat your literature searches, and you need to check this vigilance data. That's what you already did as part of your initial clinical evaluation. And the PMCF studies, I think that's more the question, whether you need them. So far, I didn't have many clients that really needed that sort of studies. I'd like to share, as I promised the last slide, that's a bit on the trend analysis thing. And I noticed a lot of companies are struggling with it. So when is something a trend? So my advice is to first, if you have all these complaints that were regarded as incidents but not reportable, try to cluster them in let's say in different groups, preferable mapping on your risk analysis. For example, your typical hazard situations, or maybe you have a lot of tags there that you can use for clustering. And then next step is you have to do some correction for underreporting, and then you have to compare. Obviously, for example, you look back 1 year in the market and you compare the numbers, the incident figures, for example, with what you estimated in your risk analysis, and then you decide if that's an increase or not. If it's an increase, the next step is to decide if it's a statistically significant increase. That's often where the problems, right? So what's statistically significant? You have to think of some numbers there, maybe at least doubling it, and at least 10 of these issues for each group, because if it's lower than that, it doesn't make sense to do any statistics on it. And then the last step that still can save you from doing a trend report is did the increase has a significant impact on your benefit risk analysis? So you may argue that this recipe is a bit written like to avoid that you do a trend report. I think that's true, and I think in general you want to avoid that. I had to file one a couple of months ago that was also linked to a recall. That was actually the first trend analysis report that the notified body got. They even didn't have a process for it internally. But I think with this sort of recipes, I think if you would put that in your PMS plan, it will save you a bit of time, and it will give you at least a good practical approach into how to decide if there's a trend in your PMS data that you may need to report. Good.
Thanks, Jouke. Yeah, I'm Sven, and surprise, I'm going to talk about post-market surveillance. And my slides don't work? They do, okay. More specifically, what I want to cover in my talk is how to do post-market surveillance in general, talking a bit along the line of our templates, possible shortcuts to PMS, and some PMS challenges that I worked with or that I experienced in my work so far. Starting though with also some introductory sentences of who am I, or who the hell are we? most of you might know this already. I work for OpenRegulatory, a company that was founded by Oliver Eidel, who was also very active in the Meetup organization. So yeah, Olli, Sören and I, we met each other working at a previous startup, GreyRA, here in Berlin. And Nicoletta just joined early this month, 1st of May. She previously worked at in silico drug development research, if I got that right. And yeah, just very, very shortly, at OpenRegulatory, what do we do? We're also medical device consultancy, trying to take a more free approach or approach to provide free information in the regulatory field, work a little bit against regulatory silos, and for knowledge sharing. We're primarily focused at startups and therefore also initial QMS certifications, and try to also take a more minimalistic approach, therefore, to these initial QMS setups. I myself, I worked as a QMO and DPO at my previous company, so I have a combined maybe five years of regulatory experience now. And I'm obviously the guy here in the middle looking at you like I was just caught stealing your cake or stuff from your fridge. Yeah, talking about post-market surveillance, some general notes on that, really for starters in that, you should compile post-market surveillance documentation, ideally per device, roughly speaking. One question that I get a lot, and that Paul also recurred on earlier, what's the difference between post-market surveillance and post-market clinical follow-up, or PMPF, or IVDD or IVDR devices? I would, again, in very broad terms, say that your post-market surveillance is mostly more reactive. You try to identify risks from other devices, as we talked about, and try to gain experience from practical clinical practice. And your post-market clinical follow-up is mostly aimed at updating your clinical evaluation. So you want to proactively gather clinical data to do that. And I would say it's primarily actually more aimed or attached to your clinical evaluation process rather than your post-market surveillance process. And then, yeah, your core documentation, just to also give that a note, your post-market surveillance process, obviously, your SOP. Let me quickly actually run through that. I'm really just skimming through it. The way you can set that up is like that. This is our template for that. And I personally also always made good experiences with putting the product manager in the lead for this, as product managers typically work day in and out with updates to the device, with bug fixes, and get all this data. You start with setting up the post-market surveillance plan. You specify what kind of information you want to collect. And by the way, again, this information you can put down in your post-market surveillance plan. I've seen it there, or in your SOP, likewise. And you also define, what should be the output of that. And note here, the periodic safety update report. That's something you would compile, as Paul already said, for Class A, 2A or higher devices. For Class 1 devices, you may want to go with a shorter post-market surveillance report only. Then you do actually compile this plan for your device. Something we recommend in our template here is do the actual mapping of MDR requirements for post-market surveillance to your actual activities here. Then you assign people to do that stuff, assign thresholds, beyond which you should take certain actions, and how often you plan to carry it out. Then you should also obviously specify a bit more, which data sources are you going to do research in, where do you extract your information from, and how will you analyze it in the end. Lastly, your periodic safety update report or your post-market surveillance report, PMSR, should then have the main output that you analyze the impact on your benefit risk profile. So, is there any more new information on risks that you had previously documented, and how does that relate to the benefit claims that you made? Now, probably most interesting, what may be possible shortcuts to your PMS, however small they may be. One thing that I've mentioned before, Paul has mentioned it already. Obviously, again, for class 1 devices, you may want to go with the PMSR instead of the PSUR. Although personally, I would say I did not see too big of a difference in that so far. The MDR says that the PSUR should include, PMCF findings and sales and product data, like what user characteristics do you have, what's the frequency of use of the device, and so on. I always found that the brunt of work actually comes anyways from, doing the literature review, research in safety databases. That's the most work. And in the end, a decision to take, I guess. Paul has already mentioned the timelines. Here again, that is probably most useful. For class 1, you really need to compile that PMSR only, and you need to update it when necessary. Same for 2A with the PSUR, but at least, or at minimum, every 2 years. And only class 2B or 3 devices need to update their report annually. Thirdly, you could also issue a combined PSUR for groups of devices. And up next, I've seen several opinions out there that you may be able to avoid the PMSF or PMPF altogether. Based on a rationale, of course, a medical scientific rationale why you don't need to update your clinical evaluation. But then at least for startups that I work with, I would ask, is that really worth it? You have to spend time on coming up with a solid rationale there. And you may actually, that's one benefit also of PMS for startups, I would say, you may want to gather medical data that may support your marketing claims in the end. So you can back them actually up with data. And at least in Germany, DIGA devices also, I guess, need to do that. So yeah, the question here, is it actually worth it in the end? A stronger point that I would make very generally, although not very satisfyingly, I guess, is the more structured you collect your data throughout the year, the easier you make it on yourself to analyze it in the end, obviously. And when you analyze it, I would really focus on the main, in brackets, residual risks and the benefits claims that you make. You can always collect more data. You may not necessarily put it into your post-market surveillance, I guess. Then the most part of my talk, I try to cut it short. I aim to cut it short, so actually giving more time for challenges and discussion of that.
Yes, you have 2 minutes.
Great. So I'm good on time. I guess that's my last slide here. First question, again, how to argue away with PMCF or PMPF. If you want to do that, then a question I get a lot, how to actually do proactive data collection. Yeah, a preliminary answer maybe already from my experience. Yeah, the most simple thing is oftentimes doing some sort of user surveys. More sophisticatedly, you can even come up with a feature maybe that prompts users, if you have a diagnostic device, for example, prompts users to answer, did this indication get confirmed, or this indication get confirmed by a physician? Did you see a doctor regarding in that regard? Back it up with what has been the follow-up. Or if you actually integrate it into a system, you may collect this data automatically, and then you may be able to run some statistical analysis of what has actually happened with your device output further down the line. So those might be some ideas. In the MDCG guideline, there's also some more recommendations on what possible proactive PMS activities could be. Thirdly, a question that Emma has asked me to prepare, but one that I also, actually, the second one was yours, Emma. The third one I also get a lot is, there is this intrinsic or inherent dilemma between you are required to collect data for post-market surveillance, but you're also required to really keep data processing at a minimum due to GDPR restrictions. And one pathway to that I've worked with in the past is this Article 9, paragraph 2, which allows data or processing of sensitive personal health data if it's for the purpose of ensuring high standards of quality and safety of healthcare for medical devices. So I don't know how feasible that is in your specific context, but that's something that I found useful in the past, and maybe it might even be worthwhile for you to look into it as well. Lastly, something that yeah, honestly, I myself struggle with a lot, and Paul has already occurred on the trend analysis, but also just naming thresholds, which is a requirement now under MDR for the post-market surveillance plan. That's not feasible for all the PMS activities that you may conduct. So for feedback, I guess that's something that you can do. You know, you don't want to get beyond a certain number of complaints. If you do so beyond that threshold, then you need to take some action. And I get the rough idea for trend analysis too. You have certain assumptions for the probability of occurrence and for the severity of your risks. But then if you really get down to calculating it, yeah, oftentimes becomes more tedious. Yeah, thanks, Paul, for your input on that earlier. But those are 2 points that I really struggled with in the past, and I just wanted to put them on here again. So yeah, if you have more ideas on any of these points, any answer to any of these points would be helpful for me actually too, and probably for other people here as well. That was it.